Hello, everybody. Welcome at Shadow at Night, Thursday, December the 12th, 2024. Special guest on the show tonight. It's the very first time I've had the opportunity to have him on. I'm extremely excited about it. He's a very nice man. We had a short conversation before the show started tonight. Ted Kuntz, the president of Vaccine Choice Canada, joins the show in just a couple of minutes. And I'm very, very happy to have him on the show. Brought to you by CanadaNanoSilver.com with Nano Silver liquid, multiple strengths, the backup your body needs, no matter how healthy you are, from needing a little bit of extra support for your immune system to needing an overhaul. SilverCeuticals immune support is light enough for everyone, but strong enough for those who really need it. I use the strong myself, the 32 parts per million bottle as opposed to the 10 parts per million bottle. SilverCeuticals immune support utilizes SilverCeuticals technology, the best nano silver technology in the world. With hundreds of third-person studies on this unique technology, you can rest assured you are getting nothing but the best. The silver particles inside Active Defense Nano Silver are both triple action and continuous action particles. This means they work better and longer than traditional silver supplements due to their unique structure. Find out more on the tech page on the website, CanadaNanoSilver.com. If you're looking for a retail location, they're all available there on the retail locations tab on the website. Alberta, BC, Manitoba, Newfoundland, Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan. Nothing in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI yet, but we're working on it. If you would like to become a retailer of these awesome products, get a hold of Kevin and Anna through the contact tab at CanadaNanoSilver.com. Let's say some quick hellos tonight. Lolita is watching in Winnipeg. Hello, Michael, watching in Brampton. Dan is watching from Ross, Manitoba. Kathy's in Bothwell, Ontario. Hello, Debbie in Oakbank. Mireille's watching in Lacombe, AB. Lena's in London, Ontario. Carol's in Red Deer. Linda's watching in Medicine Hat. Darlene's in Winnipeg. Elsie is watching in Winnipeg. Hello, Wanda, watching in Sudbury, Ontario. Jason's watching from somewhere in the backwoods tonight. Dodie Ann's watching from NB, New Brunswick. Carla watching in Calgary, wherever you're watching. And whatever platform you're watching on, please get this out there to as many people as we possibly can. Like and share. If you're watching on Facebook, that's what you do. Smash that like button. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on X, it's a repost and a heart. If you're watching on Rumble tonight, the share button is beneath the screen. You guys know what to do. Telegram, join the Shadow at Night community group. Go ahead and join it. We're at 400 members right now. We've got a couple of great questions from members back there and all access members on shadowdavis.com for Ted tonight. So we're going to get to those in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for being here, you guys. And thank you so much for getting this show out there. I want to start tonight, before we bring Ted on, with a couple of videos that I found regarding vaccines. This one is with Dr. Peter McCullough. He was on Blaze TV just a couple of days ago. This is very encouraging.
The peer-reviewed literature has now about 4,000 papers on fatal and non-fatal disabilities and deaths. So no, it's not a shock. The very first peer-reviewed publication of a man dying after the published in the New England Journal of Medicine in the summer of 2021. And the FDA has in its warnings that these do cause heart damage or myocarditis. And I can tell you clinically as a cardiologist, myocarditis, its most common manifestation after sudden death or cardiac arrest.
So when we look at the mRNA, where do they go from here? Do they have a future? Do you think that they get shut down at this point?
There are multiple calls to shut it down. The platform is not safe, that none of the COVID-19 is safe for human use. The World Council for Health in the UK was the first to call for that. Now Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, Doctors for COVID Ethics. There are now literally dozens of to be removed. They're published in the peer-reviewed literature. So I expect they will be taken off the market. Largely, the crisis is closed at this point in time. We can treat residual cases.
You know, what's amazing to me is that the social media, specifically Meta and YouTube, Google, are still very, very touchy about the word. So if you say it, they go, and the AI algorithm in there just short circuits and then shuts you down. I got a warning about that very thing from Meta just the other night. Oh, they've also demonetized my, what is it? The Reels, I think. I never use Reels anyway, so I don't care about that. But hopefully they don't demonetize everything else, because they were upset that I was using something. I don't know what it was. They never specified exactly. Donald Trump did an interview with Kristen Welker of ABC the other day. They got to talking about the vaccines. And
5 years, studies show that there is no link between vaccines and autism. And yet it sounds like you are open to the possibility of him looking
I'm
at
open to
getting
anything.
rid of them.
I think somebody has to find out. If you go back 25 years ago, you had very little autism. Now you have it. I mean,
Well, they say because they're better at identifying it.
1 in 100,000, and now it's 1 in 100. That's a pretty bad number.
Childhood vaccines
I mean,
have
something is going on. I don't know if it's vaccines. Maybe it's chlorine in the water, right? You know, people are looking at a lot of different things.
You know, childhood
I
vaccines.
want them to look at everything.
Everything. So childhood vaccines have prevented about 4 million deaths around the world every year.
I think that's
so
great.
Isn't that
I'm all for it. I think it's great. Hey, look, I'm not against vaccines. The polio vaccine is the greatest thing. If somebody told me get rid of the polio vaccine, they're going to have to work real hard to convince me. I think certain vaccines are incredible, but maybe some aren't. And if they aren't, we have to find out. But when you talk about autism, because it was brought up, and you look at the amount we have today versus 20 or 25 years ago, it's pretty scary.
Well, again, scientists say that's because they've gotten better
We're gonna-
at
I think we're gonna
identifying it,
know,
and there's
yeah.
no link in
But
studies.
the drug
so-
companies are going to be working with RFK Jr. and he's been an interesting guy to me. I've watched him for 25 years, and he's been an interesting guy.
he's been an interesting guy. We have no idea what he's going to do yet, but we think we might know. Ted Kuntz is the president of Vaccine Choice Canada. Ted, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. We really appreciate having you here. Thank you.
Well, Shadow, thanks for inviting me, and thank you for all your good work. You're one of the few that is willing to have these courageous conversations, and so I'm my gratitude to you, and to me, you're part of the solution. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah, well, I couldn't sleep at night if I didn't do this, and we had that conversation before we hit the air tonight. You've been doing this for a very long time, Ted. Vaccine Choice Canada has been around for what, 25 years now, or is it just a little longer, a little shorter?
42 years.
42. Oh my goodness, I got it wrong. A lot of people think that you guys just popped up during the last 5 years, but you've been hearing that anti-vax insult for many years, haven't you?
Well, we were invisible for probably the first 35 years because we were the fringe of the fringe of the fringe. Nobody talked about vaccine injury. But it's amazing how in the last couple of years, people are now much more receptive to having this conversation. And so, but yes, we've been around since 1982.
Oh my goodness. So was it like a tidal wave of people reaching out to you when this whole COVID thing started, as compared to the trickle that you were getting for all those years before that?
Well, our lawyer, Rocco Galati, that helped us with a couple of legal cases, he says the best thing that ever happened to Vaccine Choice Canada was COVID-19. So, and it's true. I mean, our audience was pretty small for the first 40 years or first 35 years. It was primarily parents of vaccine-injured children. And in the last few years, there's a lot of people have come to recognize that the entire vaccine paradigm needs to be questioned. And I've had actually a number of medical doctors have revealed to me that, 5 years ago, they thought Vaccine Choice Canada was a wacko group. They didn't want to be associated. We would try to interview people and they didn't want anything to do with us. And in the last couple of years, I've had a handful of doctors who have apologized. And one of them in particular, you'll enjoy this, Shadow. He says, I had to eat crow. And then he sent me a photograph of a dinner plate with a dead crow on it. So,
Oh no. Did he actually eat it?
I don't think so. He didn't send me any videos of that. But
Yeah.
It's gratifying to see that there are medical doctors who will humbly admit that they too didn't do their homework. And a good example of that is Dr. Byron Bridle. I don't know if you've had Dr. Bridle as a guest of yours, but he admitted not that long ago in one of his Substack articles is that he would constantly berate Bobby Kennedy. And he would use him as an example in his lectures at university of somebody who is anti-science, anti-vax. And in the last year or so, he's dug into actually seeing what Bobby Kennedy has said. And he contacted Bobby and he said, could I have a conversation with you? I want to apologize. And he did that. And then he said, because my belittling of him and defamation of him was public, I need to apologize publicly. And he did.
Wow, that's pretty big of them. I know there's a lot of doctors out there that wouldn't. We had Michelle Wharton on. She's vaccine injured. I'm not sure if you're aware of her and her story. And I asked her, because she can't see a doctor in British Columbia. She has to go to Edmonton to see her doctor, and she lives way up north in BC. I can't remember. It's not Prince George. It's way up there. So it's a long drive for her to go to Edmonton and see this doctor. Her mother lives in Edmonton, thank goodness. But no doctors in British Columbia, Ted, will even talk to her when she says, I've got a vaccine injury, even though it's been diagnosed by doctors in the United States. What is going on with that? Do you have any clue?
Well, I think BC is one of the more egregious violators of informed consent, ethical medicine. There was a meme that was going around because of the bills that were introduced by the BC government, and it showed a person going to their doctor and saying, "Could I have your professional opinion?" And the response is, "I can't give you a professional opinion. I can only give you a political opinion." And
Right.
the message is that I'm being constrained, and if I tell you the truth, I'm going to lose my medical license. It's quite egregious here in British Columbia, and so doctors are not allowed to practice medicine in the province of British Columbia.
Yeah, there's that new bill that went in. Was it
Bill-
last year? 37?
Yes, 36. Yes.
36. And that's the one that actually gives the province the right to diagnose. I'm simplifying it, obviously.
Well,
but
and I agree with you. To me, the province is practicing medicine without a license, and I don't know why they're not being charged for that. But yes, they introduced penalties that if a doctor goes against the government's narrative on how to treat a pandemic like COVID, that they will be fined, lose their license, could go to jail. It's pretty severe.
you saw the video off the beginning of the show there with Dr. McCullough, and I'm going to get into what Trump said in a while, but Dr. McCullough talking about all of these medical associations who have now realized their mistake, and they're coming out and they're asking for this stuff to be pulled from the market. And he seems rather positive that that is going to happen, I guess, given the circumstances in the United States right now, with Donald Trump winning the election and RFK Jr. doing what he's going to do. But what's the situation in Canada? Why are people here still so scared? And I'm not talking about just the general public, people like us. I'm talking about politicians and media and these people who can actually make a difference. Why not just come out and say, you know what, we made a mistake here and we're going to try and fix it? Because there's so many people falling through the cracks, like Michelle, when it comes to medical care. They can't get any.
Well, I think it's a lack of courage to start off with. It does take humility to say I made a mistake and I'm sorry. I think the government is going to get, sued, but unfortunately, it's not the government that pays; it's the taxpayers that pay. But the evidence is too compelling now. There are too many dead bodies, and at some point, they're going to have to admit this. And the question I have is, how many more people have to be harmed or killed before they finally do what's the right thing to do? I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. There's a global call to remove these mRNA products from the market. They've never been properly tested. They've never been properly approved. And actually, my position is none of the vaccines on the childhood schedule have been properly tested. I'm sure you're aware that none of the vaccines on the childhood schedule were tested against a true placebo. So when they say that it's evidence-based, it's not. That's a lie. The statement safe and effective is marketing propaganda. That's not scientific statements. That's not based upon scientific evidence. And so we've been lied and deceived to about vaccines for 200 years. And too many, Peter McCullough is one who talks about it being a cult. And we're dealing with people that vaccination is a religion for them. And they hold on to it like a religion. They're not willing to use their critical thinking skills. They're not willing to look at the evidence. And I think that's the frustration I have at Vaccine Choice Canada is the evidence is overwhelming that this medical paradigm, the vaccine paradigm, is causing more harm than good. And yet they trot out these messages like you saw in that Trump interview, but it's saved 4 million people. What's the evidence of that? That's pure speculation. When you ask for the documentation to prove that statement, they don't have it.
Yeah, well, you can't prove a negative, right? I mean, how can you say, and they've been saying the same thing about the COVID shot as well. Well, they saved millions and millions of people around the world. How do you know that? Where's your evidence of that? You can never show it, right? And that's one of their tactics, I believe.
Well, it's fraudulent, and it's intentionally fraudulent. Somebody sent me a document that was prepared by the Public Health Agency of Canada, and it's called A Parent's Guide to Vaccination. And I reviewed it, and there are dozens and dozens of statements in that document that are pure fiction, fraudulent, and they're intentionally dishonest. But an example is they say that a child can without concern have up to 10,000 vaccines. Now, where's the evidence of that? Yes.
10,000 at birth, like at all, not all at once, obviously, over the course of their lifetime, right? Or their childhood. But even that is egregious. 10,000, you say?
Well, again,
how many? I thought it was 72 they were getting. That was the schedule. And even that's ridiculous. But 10,000?
They're saying that a child's immune system can handle 10,000 vaccines. Now, you tell me where the evidence is to substantiate that. There's no references in those in their new parent guide. There's no documentation to support those kinds of statements. And so to me, it's intentionally fraudulent. And so myself and 5 other organizations have collaborated to write an open letter to the Public Health Agency of Canada, telling them to withdraw their fraudulent statements.
You know what's interesting? I was talking to, I think it was Kyla and Michelle and Colleen Branzy as well. And I said, wouldn't it be great if you guys, all you vax-injured folks, and there's more than that. I mean, I've had, I'm going to say 24 people who have been injured by this thing on the show over the course of the past 3 years. Some to greater degrees than others, obviously, but all with those symptoms listed by Pfizer and Moderna. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could go to Ottawa with 24 of you guys and just, be in committee, get a brave MP to sponsor this, maybe Michelle Ferrari, maybe one of the other conservatives, the guy from Oshawa, I think would be good. Colin Carey, I think his name is.
Yep.
And go out there and address Parliament. Show them.
Well, Shadow, I know you've had Sean Buckley on your program. You've had Ken Drysdale talking about the National Citizens Inquiry. I mean, we conducted 27 days of hearings in 9 cities across Canada, collected the largest library of testimony given under oath of the government's response to COVID in the world. And the National Citizens Inquiry, those words have never been uttered in our Canadian Parliament. And my question is, why not? Ken Drysdale and the other commissioners put together a final report. It contains over 400 recommendations. Why would a parliamentarian not stand up in Parliament and saying, Mr. Prime Minister, the National Citizens Inquiry has conducted an inquiry into the government's response to COVID. They produced a fabulous report, thousands of pages long, 400 recommendations. I suggest we strike a committee to review those 400 recommendations and report back to Parliament. Why hasn't that happened?
Well, the media didn't show up, I think, at any, except for one of the sessions that the NCI did last year. or was it the year before?
It was in 2023. They showed up, I think, in Regina, was it, or Winnipeg?
I can't remember which
yeah.
one it was, but only once.
And they and they didn't even stick around for the whole day.
No. So what is it about? I mean, we're not putting enough pressure on to make these politicians listen to us. And if we do put pressure on, they call the Emergencies Act. Maybe we can find a happy medium somewhere in between and really start putting the screws to them, Ted. I mean, this is something I think that you guys do, but you've got to do it in such a way that you're not embarrassing anybody, right? Or at least trying not to.
Well, I think they want us to be gentle with them, and I have a hard time being gentle with them. You know, in the first year, I might have given them the benefit of the doubt, but the evidence by now is so compelling to continue to push the COVID vaccine, to continue to declare it safe and effective, to continue to give it to 6-month-old babies is beyond fraudulent. I'm at the place now we're dealing with criminals. This is criminal negligence causing harm.
Yeah, and pregnant women still.
Well, that's a whole new area. I mean, vaccines were never given to pregnant women. Now there's 6 that are recommended for pregnant women. Are there
any good vaccines out there? Because what I take from the Trump interview there is he talked about the polio vaccine, and my first thought was, dude did not do his research on the very early days of that vaccine and how it actually gave people polio back in the early 1950s. And we don't really know if it did any good at all, that whole thing. And then they came out with these vaccines in the 60s for, what was it, measles and mumps, and then that big, huge, tragically hip saying about it, the vaccination scar in the arm, right? My dad had that for his entire life. Thankfully, I don't. A lot of my contemporaries, a lot of the guys I went to school with had. I don't even know what that was. Like, what have they been doing to us for 200 years here?
Well, they've been poisoning us for 200 years. They've been filling their bank accounts for 200 years. They've been harming our children for 200 years. I mean, our children today are much sicker than they were 3 and 4 generations ago. You know, the stats now show that over 50% of Canadian and American children have a chronic condition, a chronic illness. And it used to be, before 1986, that number was 12%. And so it's gone from 12% to 54% in a few decades. And what's happened in between is the vaccine schedule has increased. It's tripled the number of vaccines that our kids get. And so you mentioned the number 72 before the age of 18. That doesn't actually include COVID. You add COVID, if that's being given twice a year, if you're going to give the flu shot once or twice a year, you could easily have over 100 shots before the age of 18.
Are they giving COVID now as part of the regular schedule? Or they're trying to, I think.
They're recommending it, yes. That's part of the vaccine schedule.
You know, one thing I noticed when my son was growing up, and he's 39 now, so this was back in the 80s, and I was a coach of his hockey team, or maybe the 90s. It was the 90s. And, you know, there's 15 or 16 kids on this team. Now, when I was a kid, nobody was allergic to peanut butter.
Right.
Like there was none of that stuff. And you didn't have hyperactivity. There was nobody climbing the walls. I mean, you had people with different personalities, obviously. And even if they were a little bit hyperactive, I mean, nobody went running to the doctor about it. They just got a smack in the ass. Their dad gave him a smack in the ass. But in the 90s, I had to deal with these kids because I was their coach, like I was talking about. And the parents are all coming to me and saying, okay, Bobby, he's got asthma, so you have to make sure he's got his puffer. And little Peter here, he's ADHD, so we got to make sure that we've got his medication here. He's on Ritalin. I said, what the hell is that? Like, it seemed like every kid was on some kind of different drug because of a condition of some kind.
Well, and these are all autoimmune conditions. And so what affects the immune system more egregiously than vaccines? I mean, you're injecting known toxins and poisons into our infants and children. Mercury, aluminum are neurotoxic, and yet we somehow we have this notion that if you inject poison into our babies, it makes them healthy. Like, how did we get so distorted in our thinking?
how do we, I mean, big tobacco for years said, I don't know what you're talking about. Cigarettes are fine for you. They actually said that. They used to do commercials back in the 60s that, if you smoked, you were cool, right? And that started to change a little bit. And finally, the Surgeon General of the United States said cigarettes cause cancer and cause death. And now we've got all the label warnings on all the packages in Canada. And I think even on the cigarette butt now, they've got a little writing about cigarettes cause cancer. I mean, they're really overdoing it at this stage of the game. But is that the battle you're fighting?
Yes.
Because I referenced the movie The Insider last night with Al Pacino and Russell Crowe. And CBS News was almost sued into oblivion back in the 1980s when they were going to put this insider, this whistleblower on the air on their show, 60 Minutes. And they wound up having to cut him out of the segment they did on this. And big tobacco got away with it. They don't anymore. People still smoke.
But it took 40 years to bring in that kind of legislation to restrict access to tobacco and to hold them accountable and then start to sue them. And so, we're in that timeline with vaccines now, but it may take another generation or two before. I mean, I think that we're going to witness the collapse of the vaccine industry because they have been so egregious in their violations of human beings, so callous in their disregard for vaccine injury that at some point the weight of that is going to collapse. But when you've got 1 out of 2 children that have a chronic condition, when you're seeing, in Alberta, the leading cause of death now is unknown cause. Well, we know what that cause is. The cause is the COVID vaccination, and it's not even a vaccine. At some point, the evidence is so overwhelming that it has to collapse. But again, we're dealing with something that's very cult-like. I find it incredibly frustrating that I see these young parents. I actually saw a meme today that I thought had some wisdom in it, and it said, I spent more time choosing the color of paint for my baby's bedroom than I did investigating vaccinations. And that's true. That's true.
This cult mentality, are you referencing, because you've got a background in psychology, is this something that you're talking about amongst doctors, or is this the entire planet?
It's the entire planet. I mean, this is a global...
So brainwashed, people are just so brainwashed, they can't see past it. It's just a part of life.
It's a very sophisticated programming where they have made us afraid of conditions like measles and mumps and chickenpox. When they introduced the chickenpox vaccine, they didn't do it because of the health of the child. The way they promoted it is the inconvenience of caring for a sick child. And if you just take this vaccine, you won't have to care for a sick child. I mean, what I see now is that parents today don't know what measles is. Their only understanding of measles is what the pharmaceutical industry tells them. And they're convinced that if their child gets measles, they're going to die. Measles is, it's the chief medical officer out of Ontario a couple of years ago said, if we have 1 death in 100 years from measles, that's a lot.
Yeah.
But if you were to survey the public, probably 90% of the public thinks that if their child got measles, they would die.
It's interesting. Guys our age, back when we were kids, we got measles. It was like a badge of honor, right?
Yeah.
Where's Ted this week? He's not here. He's got measles. And you come back to school and they'd say, hey, measles.
Well, you would have measles parties or mumps parties where you got it over. See, the thing is that's been lost in all of this is that our immune system needs to be challenged in order to develop a vigorous response. And that's how the immune system matures. And what they've done is they've replaced an acute response to an infectious illness with a chronic condition. So our kids don't have acute conditions anymore like measles or mumps or chickenpox, which might last a week or maybe 2 weeks. Instead, they have lifelong conditions. And we call that, our miracle of modern medicine medical system.
What do you say, and I call them normies on this show, lovingly, of course. What do you say to normies who call you anti-vaxxer? You've been hearing that for a long time now, I'm sure, and you probably would be the best guy to ask how to respond to something like that.
I say absolutely. I think vaccinations are a very dangerous medical practice, and I'm gonna dedicate the rest of my life so children don't experience what happened to my son.
Let's talk about that, Ted. Like there's a lot of people out there that have had things happen to them or members of their family in their lifetimes, and instead of rising up and doing something about it like you have, they just go into themselves and they die slowly because it's such a tragic thing. And you know, I'm not pointing fingers at all at anybody, but I really admire those people who stand up and speak out, because they're not just helping themselves, they're helping so many other people. They may not know about it, but there is a lot of mud to step through and battles to fight along the way. Why do you do this?
Well, I lost a son to vaccine injury. Josh was injured by his very first vaccine shot at 4 months of age. It was the DPT shot, the whooping cough, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. And he developed an uncontrolled seizure disorder, which he had his entire life, passed away in 2017, likely from a seizure. But Josh required 24-hour care because he could seize at any time. His seizure condition was never controlled. And at one point in time, he was seizing 12 to 15 times a day. And each seizure was 15 to 20 minutes long. I mean, that's a grueling experience for a 4-year-old. It's also grueling for a mother and father to watch their child seize over and over and over again and not be able to stop it. And so it was a very difficult
You know,
time.
I'm going to stop you for 1 second, Ted, because I saw a video of you today, guys. Ted and I talked about this before the show started. There's this abandoned, excuse me, it looked like an abandoned YouTube channel that goes back maybe 12 or 13 years. And there's only about 6 or 7 videos on it. And it's you doing what appears to be a TED Talk. You're standing in front of an audience and you're talking about your son. And you're talking about, like, what really grabbed me from that was you would come home from work or from school. I think you were postgraduate at that point, maybe, or with psychology. And if Josh was in the window, it was a good day. And he'd say, "Hi, Dad." But if he wasn't there, then you knew something was wrong. And you said he was seizing upwards of 3, 4, 5 times a day. And each time he seized, it was like running a marathon.
Right.
And your son was running the equivalent in some days
12 to 15 marathons a day.
And so, and I believe you based a book upon that experience, coming home and not seeing him in the window and asking yourself, what does my son see in his dad? Does he see a happy guy, or does he see somebody who's angry, pissed off all the time and looking for revenge? And that's when you were able to turn the corner. Am I right?
That was a life-transforming event for me. I spent probably the first 5 years of my son's life being angry, resentful, afraid. I thought my son would die in front of my eyes every day. And you're describing an experience I had. Josh and I had this father-son ritual. He would hear my car drive up the driveway, and if he was well enough that day, he would come to the window to greet me. And lots of days he wasn't at the window because he was having too many seizures that day. And on this particular day, he was at the window, and I just stood there and I looked at him because it was such joy for me to have him in the window. And I heard a voice, and I don't know how to explain it, Shadow, but I heard a voice, and the voice said, "When your son looks through the glass at you, what does he see?" And I thought about that, and the answer was immediate. He sees a father who's angry. He sees a father who's afraid. And he sees a father who's rejecting his own son. Because the truth was, I didn't want this disabled child. I wanted the son that I had before the injury. And I realized I needed to make peace with the life that I had been given. And what I realized that day is I had to fall in love with the son that I have. And so I made a commitment that day that I would do that. And my journey was, how do I make peace with something that I don't like? And I ended up writing a book called Peace Begins With Me. Because I thought the only way that I could make peace with his medical condition is he had to stop seizing. And he never stopped seizing in 32 years.
And he did pass in 2017, you were telling me? Was it
Yes.
2017?
Yeah.
That has to be a traumatic experience for everybody in the family, watching your son go through something like that. And so you decided instead of just doing nothing, you would try to help other parents or make them aware before they had to go through something like that. It's pretty noble of you.
Well, it took a while, Shadow. Like in the beginning, I mean, I now recognize I wasn't responsible as a parent. I didn't do any homework about vaccination. I didn't make an informed decision. I didn't even try to make an informed decision. But what I say is the son that we brought home from the doctor's office the day he got his first vaccine shot was a different child than we took to the doctor's office. And the medical system denied it had anything to do with the vaccine. But I was a graduate student at the University of British Columbia. I had access to the medical library. And so I did my own research on the DPT vaccine. And what I discovered was there was compelling scientific evidence that the DPT vaccine was causing neurological injury and death. And they eventually pulled it from the market because of that. And so I was educating the doctors at Vancouver Children's Hospital about vaccine injury. And what I realized is they didn't do their homework either. They didn't know what they didn't know. And then it was, can I reach other parents before their kids get injured or killed by this fraudulent medical procedure?
And back then, there were not really any resources for parents. People wouldn't even think about it, right? I mean, it's a lot like today, except today, I think people are far. Have you found in the past 5 years, just in the past 5 years, since all of this COVID stuff, that people are waking up and you're getting a lot more? And I'm not just talking about COVID. I'm talking about, vaccines writ large here. I mean, all of them. Are you getting a lot more contacts from people asking, reaching out and saying, hey, like, why all of these shots?
Absolutely. The parents are finally asking the questions that we should be asking. And as you know, the World Health Organization has declared vaccine hesitancy one of the most dangerous conditions in the world today, because parents are asking questions. And what they're discovering is the medical system doesn't have the answers. When you ask for evidence of proof of vaccine safety, when doctors want to jab your kid with 6 and 8 vaccines in one visit, and you say to the doctor, where's the evidence of safety of doing that? They don't have any answers. What they're trained to basically badger parents to accept the vaccine schedule.
Ted, are these doctors taught anything about vaccines in med school? Or is it just like, here, now, once they become a doctor and they start working underneath another doctor, and this doctor says, oh, by the way, you're going to meet Joe Blow from Big Pharma. He's coming in to pitch this new thing. And then we're just going to push it on the patients, right? Like,
they're not taught anything about vaccines. They don't know what the ingredients are of vaccines. What I've heard from doctors in Canada and the United States is they're told this is the vaccine schedule, and now they're being taught how to convince parents who are hesitant to get the vaccine shot. That's what they're taught.
There hasn't been informed consent ever
Ever.
when it comes to these vaccines then, because the doctors don't know what's in them.
That's my point. My point, and I've said this in many of my speeches, is that I don't believe anybody gave informed consent to any vaccine.
How could they? I mean, if they don't know, oh, look, this is for rubella. Here, take this. And what's in it? I don't know. Just take it. And I guess it wouldn't have been as egregious back then because you were getting vaccinated in a medical area, like a hospital or a doctor's office, right? Even a school. I mean, to me, as I think about it now, I think about being in elementary school and lining up. Right. And I don't know why we were lining up. How old I was, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and standing in a line waiting to get a needle in my arm. Mm-hmm. I thought, that's weird. What am I? Go ahead.
I think vaccine clinics don't belong in schools. I think it's absolutely the wrong way to deliver that medical product. It needs to be in a doctor's office with a physician who knows the medical history of the child and the family, needs to know whether there's any adverse reactions to any other vaccines. Are there any allergies? There's a whole lot of questions that need to be asked and answered in order to make the proper decision. And none of that happens in a school where they say, all grade 7 students come to the gymnasium, line up, roll up your sleeve, and they just jab you with the HPV vaccine.
Yeah.
To me, that's coercion. And the other thing it is, from my perspective, it's undermining the responsibility and the authority of parents to make medical decisions for their children. I think the Mature Minor Act, or the Infants Act, as it's called in British Columbia, is an absolute violation of parental authority. It needs to be stopped.
That's the act we're talking about. These kids at 12 years old can go ahead and decide for themselves whether or not they want the shot, right? Does that go for all shots now, or is it still just COVID? Because that came in.
All shots. And a number of the provinces have an age when they declare that you're a mature minor. Some of them, it's 16. But in a province like British Columbia, there is no designated age of a mature minor. It's up to the person who's giving the vaccine shot. Well, what do they know about this individual? They've never met the child before, and they're making a decision about their maturity, their critical thinking skills, their knowledge. They're not given information to make an informed decision. They're being coerced to take a shot. And I'm aware of children as young as 9 years of age have been coerced to take a shot at school.
So the coercion is one thing, but the informed consent is another. This goes back to the, it's escaping my mind now, the name of the 10 right after the war.
Oh, Nuremberg Code?
Nuremberg Code. I mean, informed consent, it's all about informed consent. I don't know how I forgot Nuremberg Code. But if we haven't had informed consent since then, or even before that, where do we start?
Well, every medical profession has a code of ethics that insists on the legal and ethical requirement for informed consent. But none of the professional bodies, none of the colleges of physicians and surgeons, the colleges of nurses enforce that legal and ethical code of ethics. So
is that upon the colleges, Ted, or is that could that be considered a criminal matter?
Well, it's both. To me, it's a criminal matter. I think it's criminal negligence causing bodily harm and death. And I think, those administering these vaccine shots without informed consent, administering them to children, should be criminally charged. That's where I'm at this point in time.
Can you imagine? I mean, all of those nurses who were given those shots in convention centers and parking lots all across the country and in drugstores. And, I remember hearing the story from Saskatoon. You know the one I'm talking about, the woman waiting in line. She gets her shot. She stands up. She falls down. She dies right there. And the people
stay in line
and wait for their shot. It's Russian roulette, man.
Well, and to me, how else do you explain that than cult-like behavior, brainwashing? Like, you see somebody die from the shot and you stand in line and get your shot. This is Jim Jones drinking Kool-Aid kind of experience.
I've often thought that maybe there would be a way in the large cities, anyhow, if we could put some kind of a flickering light on one of the tall buildings at night to snap people out of it once and for all. There's got to be something that we can do to snap them out of it. But it seems to be that they have to want to know themselves. You can't go to them with it.
Well, and you mentioned earlier in this program about the level of censorship. I mean, if you say the word vaccine, you get, a strike against you in YouTube, and you get banned if you say it too often. We ran back I think it was the year was 2019. We did a billboard campaign in Toronto. We had 4 or 5 different billboards. We had a contract with the billboard company for a month to have these billboards up. Do you know how many days it lasted before it was taken down? 4 days. After 4 days, the billboard company was forced by the government to take down our billboards. And all we said were things like, how many is too many? We asked questions. What's the risk of not knowing? No shots, no school, not true. those were the messages that we had, and they forced the billboard company to take our billboards down.
Amazing that they were allowed to do that. And the whole system was rigged against us. And I guess to some extent it still is. Now it seems like that's going to be changing in the United States. Trump comes in, still, of course, raving about his Operation Warp Speed, but bringing Bobby Kennedy in and putting him in charge of all of the health, essentially, in the United States, that's a big deal. And what I've been saying for as long as I can remember now is what happens in the United States happens in Canada, whether it's good or bad, in 6 to 9 months. Do you see some light at the end of the tunnel here? I know that you've been working at this harder and longer than we have, much longer, but are you starting to see some light now?
Well, I'm very encouraged by what's happening in the United States. If Bobby Kennedy actually gets put into that position, I think we're going to see some significant change, not just in the United States, but globally, because Bobby is one of the most knowledgeable people about vaccine injury. And he if you've heard his story, he vaccinated his kids. He had to be dragged kicking and screaming to look at the scientific evidence that vaccines were causing injury. And it was, at the time, it was the amount of mercury that was being injected into our kids. And Bobby was doing his work in cleaning up the rivers and getting mercury out of our water supply system. And that was the gateway to access Bobby Kennedy. But he's an incredible warrior. As you know, he's just stepped down as chair of Children's Health Defense in the United States. I've met Bobby on a couple of occasions. I have absolute confidence that this man knows what he's talking about. My only concern is whether Trump's got the guts to make sure that Bobby has the authority to make these kinds of changes.
And if these guys can actually stay alive so they can make these changes, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened in the last little while, and Bobby Jr. is still a Kennedy.
Yep.
They've got a bad history with that kind of stuff.
Well, you go against the cabal, and human life doesn't have much value for these people that are part of this cabal.
Let's talk about the cabal. Obviously, you've known about the cabal much longer than most of us. Is it big pharma? Does it go higher? Is it all about the money, or do you think there's something else going? Is it power? What the hell? And I know you don't want, it's all speculation at this point, but many of my viewers are down these rabbit holes, as I am. I mean, I do see some things that make a lot of sense. Like, dude, I mean, they're looking at apparently UFOs or something off the coast of New Jersey right now. What the hell's going on?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that I don't know. I haven't been part of those meetings at the cabal to know firsthand. But what I do know is that I believe there's an anti-human agenda here. Like, there's a genocide happening. We're being poisoned in 100 different ways, in our medicine, in our food, in our water, in our air. Like, some days it's a wonder to me that the human species is still here because of how egregiously we're being poisoned. And it's intentional. And so who or what is so committed to the destruction of humanity? And the only way I can make sense of it is that it's the entity behind all this is not human. I don't know how else to make sense of it. To me, it's not money. I mean, these groups have, more money than they'll ever know what to do with. So that doesn't seem to me enough of an incentive. I think power for what? I mean, what more power do they need? What I see is that this is the killing off of humanity. And so it begs the question, who would be behind that? And I don't know the answer to that, but the only thing that makes sense is it's not humans that are behind this.
That makes sense to me. I mean, but then again, humans seem to be the only species that kill their own, right? Like, no other species really do that.
I think humanity is actually not very mature, that we can be easily manipulated, coerced, lied to, deceived. I suggest that humanity is actually operating as young adolescents, and it's about time we grow up and took responsibility for this planet that we're living on, took responsibility for our health and well-being. stop looking to government to babysit us. And so, as part of my psychological work, when I would work with a client, part of the assessment process is you try to assess at what age of maturity is this person functioning at. And so they might be chronologically 40 years of age, but are they acting like a 40-year-old, or are they acting like a 20-year-old, or a 15-year-old, or a 12-year-old, or a spoiled 8-year-old? And for me, then when you understand where their level of functioning is at, the question is, what arrested their emotional development? What got in the way of that? And trauma is one of the things that arrests emotional development. And I think what we witnessed globally to the COVID experience was a global trauma. People's development got arrested. Now, some people work through that trauma and I think are stronger and wiser and more courageous for it. But let's face it, you and I both know that the percentage of the human population that stood up to this adversity and held true to their morals and their beliefs and defended our rights and freedoms was less than 10% of the population.
Yeah, I was going to ask. And now we've got all these trans people running around. If you want to talk about trauma, I think that's a result of all of the trauma people have been through for the past few years, and all the rioting and the Antifa and all of that nonsense. I mean, the world is unhinged right now.
Well, I suspect, and again, I don't know for certain, but my speculation is that those gender confused individuals, in addition to trauma, they've been poisoned. I mean, what's in our water supply? What's in our air? What's in our medicines? I mean, the question I keep asking is, we're injecting our infants with aborted fetal cells from boys and girls. What happens when you put the aborted fetal cells from an opposite sex into a baby? I can't imagine that that's innocuous, that it makes no difference.
I was talking a couple of weeks ago on the show about a chemical that is in the water, not everywhere, not in all water supplies, but in Canada, I believe it's in the Great Lakes, that actually feminizes males. And they've proven it in labs with frogs, I think, and
they've turned the sex of frogs through the use of those chemicals. Yes.
Yeah, and boys are drinking that now. Have you noticed that young boys don't really seem as masculine as they were when we were young?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you seen one question from a viewer, one of my all access members at shadowdavis.com? Have you seen any encouraging court cases across our country regarding this stuff in the last 18 months?
Well, the only case that I was encouraged by is the Mosley case that struck down the Emergency Act. And that's being appealed, and it'll be interesting to see what happens under an appeal. I think Canada is actually a failed state right now, that there is no rule of law. Almost all of the significant court cases, our judges, our courts, our Supreme Court fail to stand up and defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I actually have zero confidence in our legal system right now. Vaccine Choice Canada was involved in a case. We were actually the first organization to file action against the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario in July of 2020. And we withdrew that court case just in the last, 6 or 9 months. And I wrote a lengthy essay about why we did that. But the bottom line is I had no confidence in our court system. They're not upholding the rule of law. They're not allowing expert testimony. They're doing judicial notice. And I was afraid that by pursuing that court case, that we would actually get a bad decision, which would actually add to the body of bad decisions and make the situation even worse.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, as you know, is they punish groups like ours that bring these court cases forward, and you get, assigned legal costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, it's meant to discourage groups challenging the government's response to COVID or any of these measures. And to me, that's why the National Citizens Inquiry is so important, because it's the one platform, it's the one space that there is substantive hearings that are being heard under oath that brings forward information that's being censored elsewhere.
I think there's an MLA, a recently elected conservative MLA in BC. He's got a northern riding that might be interested in hearing from you, from us, from everybody regarding all of this, and then bringing it to the legislature on the island. I don't recall his name right now, but I did talk about him last week on the show. And I'm not sure if you know who I'm referencing here, but this guy, he was part of the National Rifle Association Canada version up until last year, and then he got elected as a PC MLA 2 months ago. I think he'd definitely be interested in hearing from us, and then possibly now with this new mandate that the PCs have in BC, maybe they could bring it to the floor of the legislature.
Well,
if we can convince.
that's my hope. I mean, I'm rather disappointed in John Rustad. You know, when he booted up people like Dr. Stephen Malthouse, who was nominated to run for the PCs, Jan Webb, nurse in BC. I mean, I think there were fabulous candidates. Dr. Stephen Pellich was told that he had the nomination for his riding. That was withdrawn by John Rustad. And so I think there were very good people, very knowledgeable people in the medical system in particular. But it takes courage to stand up and saying, we need to hear from these people, that when we censor these people, we all lose.
How do you handle the media, Ted? I mean, you've spoken to the left. I call them left-wing corporate media on this show. They're not mainstream because that gives them kind of a higher plane than us, right? I mean, and they do not, as far as I'm concerned, represent the heart of this country any longer. They used to at one point, but not anymore. So how do you deal with them?
I ignore them now. Shadow, I used to do interviews with them. I did, 10 and 15 years ago, I did interviews with CBC. And at the time, they actually did a pretty good job of allowing, the perspective that I bring to be put forward. There was a time, for example, the Globe and Mail, I was invited to write a half-page article about my concerns about the risks and dangers of vaccination. And they printed it. It was a half page I got in the Globe and Mail. But that doesn't happen any longer. And the last straw for me was I was interviewed by a TV station in Toronto, and they called me up and I said, listen, I don't do interviews with you guys anymore. And they said, please, 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 we know who you are. You're one of the most knowledgeable people about vaccines. Your perspective really needs to be heard. And, after they badgered me for half an hour saying that they really wanted to hear what I had to say, I said, okay, let's do the interview. So I spent an hour in an interview with them, and then when I watched what was actually put, televised, was about.
Did they make you look like a wingnut or try to?
Yes. And I asked that. I said, when you have my name listed on the screen and you have who I am, I want you to say the parent of a vaccine injured child, and they put Ted Kuntz, anti-vaxxer. And so I called them up after that and I said, I'm never doing an interview with you guys again. Nobody in mainstream media, you're not honest. In 2019, when New Brunswick, the province of New Brunswick, was introducing legislation to remove personal belief and religious exemptions, Vaccine Choice Canada brought 6 world-class experts to New Brunswick to speak with the subcommittee of the legislature. And every media was there, CTV, CBC, Global, and they were doing media scrums with me. And I said to them, I have one request of all of you. And they said, well, what is it, Mr. Kuntz? I want you to declare that I'm a parent of a vaccine-injured child. Not one of them, not one network would do that. Ted Kuntz, anti-vaxxer.
How do you deal with these pejoratives? The anti-vaxxer, anti-masker. You're just one of those anti-maskers. A cop called me that once, right in the height of COVID, in the middle of a street war here in Winnipeg between Jews on one side and Palestinians on another. None of them wearing masks except for the cop and his cop buddies, and not me. And I said, did you just look at me and say you're one of those anti-maskers? Are you kidding me right now? Like, what's the matter with you, man? You've got like 30 people throwing rocks at each other over here, and you're more worried that I'm not wearing a mask? Unbelievable.
Well,
so I went off on the cop. I didn't mean to, but I got a hair trigger sometimes, and you get pushed far enough, eventually you're gonna go.
Well, where I'm at now, Shadows, I embrace that. Yes, I am. And I'm proud of it. I've done my homework. And so they try to use it as a way of censoring, and I don't take it that way. I'm proud of the stand that I'm taking. I feel like I can defend it with anybody.
Do you need people in Vaccine Choice Canada? Are you looking for volunteers? Can people help you out in any way? Is there anything anybody can do?
Well, we've just produced a new book called A New Parent's Guide to Understanding Vaccination. I think it's a fabulous book. Our goal is to reach young parents, and we want to get to them before their child gets injured. And what I would love is that people would download the book or purchase the book, read it first of all, and then give it to somebody that they know that is involved or needs to be involved in that vaccine decision. Help to get that information out. That would be the best gift that they could give us right now.
And you can get this on your website?
Yes. There's a link on our homepage. We have an e-store called uptoeveryone.com. All of our books are listed in there, as well as postcards. There's free downloads. But people need to educate themselves. This is an important conversation. I don't want people just to take my word for it. I want them to make an informed decision. And I'm absolutely confident that if they did their homework, they would never vaccinate again.
I wonder, as I'm thinking right now, we are streaming live on YouTube still. I see they haven't taken this down yet, which is amazing to me.
I guess I didn't say the V word often enough, huh?
But I wonder, when Trump takes office in, 40 days now, and RFK Jr. starts doing what he's going to do you think they're going to have the balls to keep censoring words like vaccine and COVID, pandemic?
Well, I think that if Trump stands with Kennedy, that there will be punishments for those media outlets that and colleges of physicians and surgeons that censor that kind of information. So I think there has to be consequences for their violations of the fundamental right of free speech. But also, to me, that's what science is. We should be able to have scientific debate. And as you know, with the National Citizens Inquiry, we invited every public chief medical officer of every province, Theresa Tam, ministers of health. We said, come and testify before the NCI. Tell us why you did what you did. Tell us what evidence you have to support your position. And not one of them had the courage to come before an audience and testify under oath.
Maybe one day. We just got to keep at it. Ted, it's been a pleasure having you on the show tonight. Thanks very much for coming on. Hopefully we can do this again one day soon.
I would like that. Thank you for giving me the time, and thank you for your questions.
Absolutely. Ted, we'll talk to you again. There's Ted Kuntz of Vaccine Choice Canada. I do have a few more things to go through if you guys want, because there is still, well, no, wait a minute. We're past. We are past 9 o'clock Central, baby. It's time to go to the extension on shadowdavis.com. So we're going to do that in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to make an announcement regarding shows on Friday and Monday night. So tomorrow is my birthday. And because of that, I've been asked to go out for lunch and for dinner tomorrow with two different people. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give myself a break. So there's not going to be, and I'm not paying. So there's not going to be a show tomorrow night. No live show tomorrow night. Now, I haven't decided on Monday yet. There may not be a live show Monday night, but there will be something. There could be a best of, like I did last Friday night, hopefully. And so just so you guys know, Monday night may or may not be live. It could be a repeat. Wednesday night, we have the wonderful Karen Kingston on the show. She's going to be talking about what Peter Hotez said. Remember, I played the video for you last night and then last week. Peter Hotez, that crazy scientist from Texas, talking all about, we've got, all of these viruses all coming out January 20th. looks crazy, this guy. And yet he names a specific date, January 20th, when Trump takes office. Are they planning to just release the hounds on January 20th? What the hell is going on? So Karen is going to talk about that and all kinds of other stuff Wednesday night. Karen Kingston is on the show Wednesday night. You guys have a fantastic weekend, and I will catch you next week. I love you all. I appreciate you all. I'll see you in the extension on shadowdavis.com for you all accessors in 2 minutes. If not, I'll catch you next week. Bye for now.